Madeira, Manchester, Madrid, Turin, and Manchester again. Aguero! Goal for South Africa! Goal for all Africa! Roma have risen from their ruins!
Welcome back to the On a Yellow Football Podcast, episode 37. We are back, Zach. How are you feeling?
Refreshed after a little bit of a break.
Yeah, we took a 2-week break after the World Cup to kind of, allow us to rest a little bit because we had a lot of World Cup content, but also allow the footballing world to get a lot more news out, and a lot more transfer news, and get ready for this next season, because it was just basically friendlies for the last 2 weeks, and we got to see some new faces on new teams, and we got to see just basically, you got to see your team in the Carabao Cup. So that's interesting, how your team is starting the Carabao Cup now, early, obviously, after being relegated from the Premier League. All right. So, we haven't done this in a while, but obviously what comes with the On a Yellow Football Podcast comes with the Canadian Soccer Recap. Zach, are you ready for the Canadian Soccer Recap?
Yes, sir.
Welcome to the Canadian Soccer Recap, connecting Canadians to the beautiful game.
The Canadian under-20 side has been in action in the CONCACAF Under-20 Championship, making it as far as the semifinal against Mexico. But the semifinal was all they needed to qualify for the Under-20 World Cup.
Canada scored a pair of beautiful volleys that will definitely be stuck on replay. Owen Graham-Roach scored an absolute beautiful strike against Mexico early in that game, and Max Vogel scored an absolute scorcher against Jamaica to seal victory and also seal that World Cup qualification.
Despite the disappointment of missing the Olympics in 2028, there has been massive growth through all of the stages of Canadian soccer, and we're really seeing those ripples now in the youth teams, and I hope that we can continue to see that grow during this World Cup.
Vancouver Whitecaps FC up-and-coming player Liam McKenzie had a tournament to remember, scoring 3 goals, including a brace. And it's going to be great to see if he can actually make it to the big leagues. But sadly, he did receive a yellow card that has been the topic of debate ever since that happened. All right, with that being said, Zach, can you do your sign-off, please?
Bonjour, au revoir, and have a great rest of your week.
See you later, guys. All right, Canadian Soccer Recap is done. Welcome back On a Yellow. I'm excited for this episode. I'm just excited to be back in the booth. We got the lights going on. We got the cameras, lights, camera, and now it's action. And we are ready for this episode. All right, what comes with a new Premier League season comes with new teams in the league, 3 to be exact. We got Coventry City, Hull City FC, and Ipswich Town, and they all play their first games in a couple weeks. The first game, it's kind of, probably one of the hardest starts for a newly promoted team, and that is playing against the league winners, and that is Arsenal v. Coventry. 2 league winners, to be exact. One won the Premier League and one won the Championship. What's your thoughts on it? What's your thoughts on Coventry City? Because obviously, we've not seen Coventry City in the Premier League in a while, and they've been kind of busy getting some players in since they got promoted. There's a couple players that come to mind that I think would do really well, but what's your thoughts on the team?
I think they have a team that obviously competed immensely well in the Championship, and I think they have a lot of pieces that can still be very competitive in the Premier League, but they do have a lot of spots that I think needed some reinforcement, and I think they've gotten a couple guys in that I think can help them this season, but I don't think they have quite enough yet to stay up. There's still some time in the window, but I don't think they've brought in enough guys that are Premier League quality to stay up this season.
Totally. I think, they got two players that come to mind that they got in their transfer window, and that is center back Ariel Amenda from Frankfurt. He could possibly be someone that could help Frank Lampard in his system. And they also got the wonder kid from Ghana, Caleb Yerenki. I believe that is how you pronounce his name. I'm sorry if I butchered that. But he is a fantastic talent, but he's not Prem proven. It was kind of a gamble getting him. Obviously, he scored in the World Cup to win against Panama, but we don't really know if he's going to get to that level yet. Now, going back to Ariel Amenda, he's 23 years of age. He's 6'4". He played 24 matches in the Bundesliga with Frankfurt last season. And he could possibly be someone that could help that team. Obviously, he played his game in a top 5 league last season, which would help. But another thing is Frank Lampard has a pretty fluid system. He actually goes into a back three in his games when the ball is pushed forward. He likes to play fast transition football. And during that fast transition, he pushes bodies forward and he actually creates a back three. With a back three, you need a ball playing center back. And I believe that Ariel Amenda is that kind of ball playing center back. He had 89.89 touches per 90 last season. So he's comfortable with the ball. And, being comfortable with the ball in a top 5 league could be an asset to that team.
I mean, I do think, he is kind of, he has a lot of potential still at only 23, but I don't think, last season we saw Sunderland's kind of strategy was bringing in guys that have been competing at the top level for a while and guys that are experienced in the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
And the only guys kind of that they've been brought in to Coventry City that have experience in the Premier League is Frank Onyeka and Loum Chuana. And Chuana's only had one season with Burnley last year where he got relegated and only scored twice. And he played like 36 games, and they spent $25 million on him. So I don't think they've necessarily made the best purchases, but I think Frank Onyeka will be a big piece of that team, having been in the Premier League with Brentford for a while now.
Yeah,
and bringing in him to kind of have that leadership role and kind of give guys what the expectation in the Premier League will be, because you have to have that next jump up in level despite how well you did in the Championship. There still is a massive jump between, even I think 20th in the Premier League and first in the Championship most of the time.
Yeah, and I think we've seen, lately, we've seen teams that actually have gone promoted through the playoffs do better than the teams that got automatic promotion. I think for the past couple of seasons, the teams that got automatic promotion have almost gotten mostly relegated. I think, Leeds comes to mind, the team that stays up. But, I agree, winning the Championship does not necessarily mean you're going to do well in the Premier League. The Premier League's a completely different animal. And, they've not really been that busy, Coventry, and that's surprising to me. They make over £100 million for getting promoted, and they have that in their transfer window that they can use. And, they've only really gotten 4 new players plus Onyeka, so 5. But, I just think that, I don't know necessarily if they're going to do great. They might struggle. They might struggle to get goals. We don't really know if Haji Wright is that guy to score goals in the Premier League. And it's just something that this year it seems that team that was so good in the Championship might kind of show, how difficult the Premier League is.
I think, for me, the biggest piece that they got, there was Carl Rushforth coming back after the season he had last year.
Yeah.
I do think, he is kind of a good goalie for them to build around a little bit. And they do have players on their team that I think are of the level already. Guys like Milan van Ewijk, one of their fullbacks. I think he's, an incredible player. He's been proving that for a couple of years. But a lot of the rest of this team, I don't think they have, the quality necessarily to compete super heavily in the Premier League. They have guys that can probably score some goals, but I think they'll have kind of a similar fate to a lot of the promoted teams that come up.
Yeah.
And the two promoted teams that we saw last year that did really well, both Leeds and Sunderland bought a lot of already established players. They weren't buying young guys hoping that, they can grow into something in just one season. They're buying players that kind of have already hit that stride and have a little bit more stability in their career and kind of know what kind of player they already are. And building a team of those kind of players, I feel like you're going to have a little bit more success in terms of just competitiveness. Bringing in a guy like Kieran Key, sure, he's got a lot of potential. He's 20 years old, but he's never played in a top league. And coming into the Premier League and hoping that he can be one of your main center mids to keep you up is it's a big task for only a 20-year-old.
Well, it's a big gamble, and I agree. It's like all those other teams, they bought established Prem talent, and I think, with your first season coming up from the championship, it shouldn't be trying to get this young wonder kid on your team. It should be developing your own and bringing in the players that you bring in are those Prem proven talents, or just people that have been in the Prem. They might be 38 years of age, but they'll go on your team and they can get you some results. And, you look at Sunderland getting Granit Xhaka. That was a huge player to get onto that team, and it really helped them stay up because they got that Prem proven player and someone that can lead that team and lead a team through the Premier League because he has that experience. And Yarenki, he's a gamble, right? They got him for a club record signing of £23.1 million plus £2.5 million in add-ons. He's a versatile player. He can play center mid, but he also can play right back. And I think that's why they got him, just that versatility, being able to place him wherever they see fit. Now, they got some he has that potential. He is an exciting player. He has 2 goals and 6 assists last season, and he started all 30 matches. But we're talking about the Danish league. Now, the Danish league is a professional league, of course, but it's nowhere near the Premier League, right? And, I just don't know if he's up to the task of starting those games. It's like, right, he's 20 years of age, and you're going into one of the best leagues in the world. That's a big ask, right, for that 20-year-old.
I mean, his average match rating is really good, though, to be fair. But, the Danish league and the Premier League, that's such a step up in competition. And he very well could, be one of those players that kind of thrives off of the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of levels out with whatever league he's in.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a big challenge, I think, at the very beginning at least.
Mm-hmm.
How different the two leagues are. Can he compete immediately?
We don't know. That's the thing. It seems like Coventry have gotten a lot of players that would do really well for a season in the championship, but the Premier League's a whole new animal. It seems like they haven't really changed their transfer window from the championship to the Premier League. It seems like they've had these people shortlisted and they just got them now, but they've gotten promoted. It's going to be it's a task for that team to see if they could make it to that level. We don't really know, and I think this is kind of a tale for a lot of the teams both 3 teams getting promoted. All 3 of them have had transfer windows. They haven't really necessarily gotten that Prem talent. And maybe that will be a thing where we get all of them getting relegated, but only time will tell. Now, they play against Arsenal, right? Arsenal obviously coming off winning the league last season. Now, what's your thoughts on this Arsenal squad? Obviously, they brought in a couple people. Notably, they brought in Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle, What's your thoughts on, Arsenal? Obviously, they're against Coventry City. I think it's going to be maybe 1-0 Arsenal, 2-0 Arsenal. If Arsenal can come back to scoring goals again. But obviously, they brought in some really good players. Now, after winning the league, they got a ton of really talented players wanting to play for their team. And one of those is that Bruno Guimaraes. So what's your thoughts on Arsenal so far this season and this transfer window?
I mean, they haven't, brought in a ton of guys. They also haven't lost anybody,
Yes.
super pivotal. Obviously you'd kind of want to keep Trossard, I think, especially for only 20 million. But, they brought in Christos Solis from Club Brugge, who had a fantastic season in Belgium. And, he obviously, he could very well start on the left at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the winger options they have, it could happen. But I do think, he's kind of a backup option, a rotation option at the beginning of the season. If he does well, then, maybe, he steps up in his role a little bit. But, bringing in Bruno Guimaraes to that midfield that's already so strong, I think is a big, big add. And I think it just means that this team has even more depth and quality than they already did. And I think, they're very well going to be a challenger for the title again, obviously. And I feel like they're going to show that skill, that level in the first game against Coventry. I think it might be like a 4-0 win.
Yeah, it could be. I think, for Arsenal, it's if they can come back to scoring goals again. I think, Gyökeres needs to show a little bit more this season for the price tag that they got him in with and just...
They could be getting Julian Alvarez, don't you know?
Yeah, they could be. Arsenal's been linked with, everyone, it seems. They've been linked with Vinny Jr. at one point. Obviously, that didn't go to Arsenal's plan, and he signed a new contract with Real Madrid. But, they've been linked with a ton of other people. Julian Alvarez, obviously, is the one that they've been looking for, and they kind of do need that striker to get them to the next level. Gyökeres hasn't performed to what people thought he was going to and what he did in Sporting. So I think that definitely a new striker could make them an absolutely insane team. Someone that can score goals day in and day out is something that I think would make them one of the best teams in the league. And vying for that championship again. The addition of Bruno Guimaraes, I agree. It adds so much midfielder depth. They already have very good midfielders. They have Mikel Merino, Zubamendi. They also have Ødegaard and Declan Rice, and now they have Bruno Guimaraes. That's 5 midfielders that were all, at the World Cup playing for their nations, and now they're back here. And they have at least 3 creative midfielders when they're playing. If they play Bruno Guimaraes, Declan Rice, and Ødegaard all at the same time, that's 3 really creative and talented midfielders that offers a lot of fluidity in that midfield. Maybe not as defensive as some people would like, but when you play, I just think it would be a very interesting team to watch. Obviously, Bruno Guimaraes also does set pieces as well, which is a thing that they love, obviously, with Arsenal being kind of the set-piece merchants, as everybody says. And, having multiple midfielders that can do it can add just versatility to your lineup. If Declan Rice is out or if Ødegaard's out, that he's, we've seen Ødegaard get injured for long periods of time. They needed that other midfielder to help them, and now they got a Bruno Guimaraes.
It's definitely going to make them even more difficult to play against in the midfield.
Exactly, right? They're already a very difficult team to play. And now just adding that talent on your team, obviously the talent that has carried Newcastle for multiple seasons. Last season was their top goal scorer and top assist getter. So obviously, if you put 2 and 2 together, he was the top goals and assists on the team. And, he's a talent, and we knew that he wanted that next step in his career. Newcastle wasn't giving him the championships and the trophies that he wanted, and now he wants to go to a team to try to solidify him as being one of the best midfielders of his time. and he could possibly get there. And I think that they will be definitely trying to get that championship once again.
I think it'll be a good season for them. Especially if they do manage to bring in Julian Alvarez, I think that makes them just even more scary, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, you talk about like an actual really good goal scorer in the top 5 leagues, and he's been a goal scorer for Atletico Madrid for multiple seasons, and he has Prem experience. Obviously for Manchester City, where he didn't really get a lot of game time due to Erling Haaland being in the lineup. But it would be kind of interesting to see a battle between him and Erling Haaland if that deal goes through. Now, we got the next game, which we're going to talk about, which is the next newly promoted team and the next game on the schedule, and that is Hull City versus Manchester United. What's your thoughts on that?
I do think, Hull has, they've had an interesting transfer window, especially with how, their owners kind of not made, their transfer business secret whatsoever. He's made it very public, if anything.
Yeah.
Kind of posting their transfer list and how close to things are being done and how which ones are done and just need paperwork. And they're signing a lot of players, but I don't think, they're not signing, world beaters in any sense.
Yeah.
They signed they've brought on a lot of players who, are younger, guys like Lucas Harrington.
7 new faces.
And more to come because they haven't even announced most of the guys yet.
Yeah.
But, 18, 19-year-old Lucas Harrington, I do think, they got a steal of a deal for Elliot Stroud from Mulby for only 2.5 million euro.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a talented player. He's just playing in not a great league.
Yep.
They brought in Jens Herto Dahl from Tromsø for 10 million, which I think is also a great deal. He's got a ton of potential. And, they have guys like Noble Mendy, who's still yet to be announced, guys like Leon Bailey, who I think is kind of a player that I like them going after, he's been in the Premier League for years and years. He's had good seasons. I do think a change of scenery could be good for, Leon Bailey, and I think it could help Hull be one of the better promoted sides this year.
Do you think that they have a chance to stay up?
Out of the 3 that have come up, I think they're my favorite to stay up at the moment. Things could still change because the window's still open. But I do think they've made good signings. They've made smart signings. They've made signings that have played in the Premier League for a while. And I think, they have a good mix of youth with, guys that have experience playing in top leagues. They brought in Morita, I think it was, from Sporting for free. They brought in Matt Taggart for free. They brought in Jack Butlin for free. Kind of be guys that you can be leaders in the dressing room, have played at the top level before, and guys that, they might not play many minutes this season.
Yeah.
But they're going to be important for, this team if they do want to stay up.
Yeah. Now, talking about like newly promoted teams, you need that goal scorer. And obviously they have their main number 9, Ollie McBurney. Now, can Ollie McBurney do what he did in the championship and translate that to the Premier League? What's your thoughts?
I do think, he's a little bit better of a player than last time he was in the Premier League.
Yeah.
I think he's a little bit more... he's in a more stable spot now.
Mm-hmm.
I think a team that supports him a little bit better than Sheffield United did when he was in the Prem with them. And I think, they've kind of started building the team around getting him the ball and getting goals to him. And I think if they can continue to do that, he could have a good season. But I'm sure they're also looking kind of at other strikers that are on the market and potentially bringing in somebody that can complement him or kind of take that spot maybe, depending on how much they want to spend on a guy. But I do think he can have a good season.
Yeah, I mean, he's, like we've said, he struggled in the Prem previously. Obviously, his last season in the Prem was 23-24. He got 6 goals, 3 assists. after a 13 goal, 2 assist season in the championship. So he got newly promoted and then got only 6 goals. So, he's had seasons where he's done really well in the championship, but hasn't done great in the Premier League. Now, we can say that the team didn't compliment him and all that stuff, and maybe this team compliments him more. I don't know. I mean, you seem to believe so. Now, I mean, we've seen players go from a great season in the championship and translate that into the Premier League. Obviously, one of the biggest ones would be Mitrovic for Fulham. He got he had a 15 goal season after getting promoted with Fulham. So, anything is possible, right? But we don't necessarily know right now if he can produce. But he's an older player now. He has experience in the Premier League, and maybe his experience in the Premier League and his experience in Spain and other leagues would maybe help him, in the Premier League to be a talisman for them.
I think, they have an interesting, dynamic, especially with how their owner, has acted on social media.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting to see an owner kind of, outright say, who they're going after, not by name, but, you put the flag to players they're kind of linked to, and you can kind of figure it out pretty well. And I think it's interesting to see that, see how open he is to telling people, who they're going after. And I think, it could be an interesting strategy to see if it does end up working for them this season. Maybe we'll see more teams kind of go that route, more owners try and do that if they do end up staying up. And I think, just having Hull City in the Prem in general, I think will be a fun team to be in the Prem.
It's a really fun team. Obviously, I've always liked the team. I've seen them in basically, I believe, 10 years or whatever. So it's going to be really neat to see him in the Premier League. Now, does buying a ton of players benefit you more than buying a handful of Prem-proven talent? Or is it just kind of too much players?
I mean, I do think they were a team that, coming into the championship season last year, they were favored to be relegated. Mm-hmm. So I think there was a lot of work to be done on this roster. Even if a lot of these signings might not necessarily be Prem-proven, they're not guys that are going to necessarily want to leave because of relegation. And I think it will help the club out significantly in the long term to buy more players, because some of these guys will be players that stick around with them in the championship if they do get relegated, and guys that they can have a stronger roster overall by bringing in more guys than focusing on a couple guys to try and fill in hyper specific gaps. If they kind of have this wider transfer range, and they're not spending a ton on a lot of guys. They brought in multiple free transfers. They're buying guys for $2.5-3 million as well. They're buying guys that aren't going to necessarily break the bank, but can potentially turn into home run swings of signings.
That's interesting. Now, obviously, Hull City has a Canadian player on their team, Liam Miller. What's your thoughts on him and his and how do you think he's going to be utilized in the Premier League? Do you think he's going to be utilized at all, or do you think he's just going to be a bench player?
Well, he did just get injured.
Yeah.
So he might not really play that much this season.
Okay, yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to see if he does end up playing this season. I think with the players they've brought in, I think he can still compete.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be a lot more difficult now because of, they've brought in a lot of guys, some guys that will be in the similar positions to him. And I think it'll be good to see how he competes and if he can compete at the Prem level. I just don't think that he's a Prem quality player, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean we've seen it. Like, he's kind of been that kind of championship baller, and we've seen a lot of championship ballers do really well in the championship. Their kind of streets will will not forget those players, but when they go to the Premier League, they get almost forgotten because they just aren't at that level of the Premier League. I'm hoping, if he is healthy, to see him in the Premier League, just to say that, we have some Canadian ballers in the Premier League that are playing games, maybe not regularly, but at least are coming off the bench and are on the team and are just not on the reserves or whatever, right? So it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, I don't know if he's going to necessarily go to that level of the Premier League, because we've seen, even in the Championship, he wasn't the top level of the Championship. You look at even Ollie McBurney, they were pretty good. And then, he was kind of filtered in through the team. And, he had some decent moments, but it's going to be neat to see a Canadian footballer just in the Prem in general.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll be, a good time for Canadians this season.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of guys playing in top divisions, and I think it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will be. All right, looking at the team that they're going to play, and that is my team, Manchester United. First game of the season against Hull City.
At a blimey 5:30 a.m.
Yeah,
start
it's
time.
5:30 in the morning for us Canadians. So we have to basically wake up really early for that game. That's all right. It's worth it to see the first game of the Premier League. Now, Man United, they're obviously looking for another great season after last season, getting third. I think, if we get third and above, at least Champions League football, we're happy, because we're in a state right now. We're still kind of rebuilding our team. We're still kind of growing and developing some of these players and developing tactics and changing the climate at the club. And obviously with Champions League football now, it's going to be a whole other animal. We're playing a ton more games. Last season we had the least amount of games out of any team in the Premier League, and now we are back, but we have Champions League football. It's going to be interesting. We have some new faces. We've made 2 really good signings so far. Obviously, we signed Andre Santos and we signed Yuri Tielemans for $35 million or something like that through a release clause in his contract, which was absolutely a great signing to see. Now, I want to talk about Andre Santos, right? What's your thoughts on Andre Santos?
He's still a young player. I think, when he was brought to Chelsea, there was a little bit, there was, I think, higher expectations than there probably should have been at the start. He's been a Chelsea player for a while now. And last season was the first year where he kind of really stepped into that side. He played a lot of games. And I think, United are getting a player that didn't get necessarily a fair chance at Chelsea.
Yep.
And I think it could turn into a fantastic deal for them.
That's what I mean. For the same amount of money as Tottenham paid for your Mateus Fernandes, we got 2 very good midfielders. And, Andre Santos, he's not the Casemiro replacement yet, but he has potential to be.
I think, it's been an interesting transfer window for Manchester United.
Yeah.
I would have thought they'd have signed a few more players than they have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think letting go of Radik Vidic for like $8 million.
It was $8 million. I thought Vitek was going to go for way more.
I saw so many Man United fans saying to not sell him unless you're getting like 25.
Well, he was Bristol City's best player last season.
He had a great year last year, and and I was going to a Middlesbrough team who I think could very well get second in the championship this year. It's interesting to see that be the player you decided to let go instead of having him be one of those squad players and went and got a Carl Darlow and keep Tom Heaton on the team.
Yeah,
I think. It's an interesting move. I think they would have preferred to keep Vitek around. He obviously didn't want to be a backup goalie.
That's what I mean, right? So Vitek didn't want to be a backup goalie, and we've been loaning him out for the past couple of seasons. And, it was going to be either another loan or we were going to sell him. I thought we were going to get more for him, and I think a lot of Man United fans wanted that. We wanted upwards to that 20 million mark because of how fantastic he played. and now he's going back to the championship playing for Middlesbrough.
Man United have loaned out 3 goalies and sold one in this window.
Yes, yeah.
Loaned out Bayendier, Onana, and I imagine this guy is probably just a academy guy.
Yep.
But still, it's interesting to see how many goalies they have.
We have a ton of goalies. Now, Darlow was a good pick because Darlow's been a backup keeper for Newcastle for a while now.
He was at Leeds, though.
He was at Leeds?
Yeah.
Well, he was at Newcastle at one point.
He played 38 games for Leeds in the last 3 years.
Okay.
He played 24 games for them last year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not I think, not a terrible goalie for a backup.
Yeah, he's a backup keeper, right?
I just don't understand keeping Tom Heaton around on an extended contract.
I think he's just because he's a third keeper. I mean, Scott Carson for Manchester City was on the team for a while, right? So
That is fair. I mean, he's played 3 games.
yeah, he's a third keeper, right? He's one of the jobs that I think a lot of people would love to have, which would be the third choice keeper of a Premier League team, where you basically just get to watch Premier League games for free and train on the side, and say that you're a player for a Premier League team. So I mean, I think third choice keeper is the job of the third choice keeper, and keeping an older person there is always pretty good because they're not wanting more from their career. They're not necessarily wanting to, being like a 20-year-old. They want to play games. They want to grow their career. And being a third choice keeper is just not something they would want to do. But someone that is, getting older in age is fine doing that because they've already been to the heights of their career, right?
I mean, is there any kind of players that are linked to Man United before the window closes, or is it just going to be the 2 guys?
We've been linked to quite a lot of players, but a lot of those stuff haven't gone through. Like we've been linked to players like a Shuameni and like a Tonali and like all these people before the transfer window even opened, and all of those deals didn't go through.
I'm surprised there hasn't been kind of any like links towards a new right back or anything like that.
That's what I mean, like a right back or a center back. Obviously, Araujo went on loan to Liverpool because Liverpool obviously lost Konate and they just loaned out Araujo from Barcelona. But yeah, no, we've not really been linked to anybody yet. A lot of what we've had is a lot of growing talent and bringing them up from the academy. So we brought back Rashford. He's going to be number 14 this year, a new number, one he hasn't used yet, and he's going to be staying on the team. So I think that's one thing. We were going to maybe look for another winger on the team, but now we got Rashford, so we don't have to. And we wanted the midfielders. We got 2 midfielders. That's pretty good. But I was expecting us to get that center back or right back player. I mean, left back potentially. We have Shaw. If Shaw's healthy, he's good enough. Dallow is all right. But we also have Mazraoui too. Like we do have Mazraoui on our lineup that I think should be playing a lot more games. He showed his talent in the World Cup this season. But, I think there's been a lot of people on our short list that we just haven't been able to get deals through because they've joined other teams, obviously for way more money that we were willing to spend. So I don't necessarily know. I mean, I think like I said earlier, the addition of the academy players is great, right? We got Shea Lacey who's coming up through the ranks, and I think he's going to have a more prominent spot, at least on our bench this season. And then obviously we have JJ Gabriel who came up for the friendlies that we had, the international friendlies now, or just the friendlies rather. But like, I think, JJ Gabriel is a talented footballer. I don't think he's ready for that Premier League. He might we might put him up a little bit. He might have a Shea Lacey kind of situation last season where he's up for some games and then he's back down in the academy and then he's up for some games, which I think would be better for his development. It's kind of like a Max Dowman situation and stuff. I think Ngamoa is probably one of the only people that has that spot really on that team at that young age. But, it's exciting for Manchester United. I think that maybe potentially we'll be looking for that center back or right back right before the season starts, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to happen because I've not seen us linked with anybody like that.
I think it'd be interesting to see who they could potentially bring in before the window closes. But if they don't, I do think they're still set up pretty well for the good next season. So
Yeah, we're set up for the next season. Obviously, we want to make top 4 again, and that's a win for us. Battling for the league is going to be a bit difficult when you have a lot of teams that have a ton of talent on them. Manchester City and Arsenal are looking like the front runners again. And, maybe Man United squeaks in or Liverpool squeaks in, or even Aston Villa. But Aston Villa have lost a lot of their players. Maybe Chelsea this season could possibly, try to squeak into that top 4 battle. But, only time will tell. Like we said, last year when we started this podcast basically a year ago, we said we were talking about the Premier League, only time would tell, and that's kind of how we're feeling right now, right? It's kind of hard to say who's going to win the league and predict who's going to get relegated because, the storylines always happen between in the middle of the season, and we don't necessarily know who's going to make it to that level yet. Now, last game for the championship promoted teams, and that is, like I said earlier, Ipswich versus Sunderland. What's your thought on that game?
I think that will be an interesting one just to see, obviously Sunderland were kind of, a surprise last season. They were very, very good. It'll be interesting to see how, Ipswich Town, who were just promoted this year, compare against last year's promoted team, Sunderland. And Sunderland, I think they've had a shocking window.
Yeah.
Considering, they made Europe and they've signed one guy on a free transfer.
And Thomas Meunier.
Which, I mean,
he has experience, but
he's not really going to play very many games for them. And everything else for them is just been losing players for free. And I think, we would have expected, bigger things for them this season. Maybe they overspent last year and couldn't spend this summer.
Maybe.
For financial fair play reasons. I do think they could be in a little bit of trouble this year, Sunderland. I do think, the way their schedule is going to be playing in Europe and the Premier League, they're going to have to be, very, very well rested, very well training. And I think it could be kind of troublesome for them considering they haven't brought in more players for the squad. And I think they could be in a bit of trouble this year.
Totally. I think they definitely could. Now, going to Ipswich, they've signed some pretty decent players on their team. I think, they've also kind of gone the way of Hull City signing a ton of players. Now,
I like their signings, though.
I do like their signings. Now, there's 2 signings I like, and that's Daisen Maeda and Issa Diop. I'm so excited to see Daisen Maeda in the Premier League to see how he fares. Obviously, moving from the Scottish Championship, or the Premiership, is going to be hard. It's going to be a really hard battle. But he has, he's playing for Celtic, who plays actively in Europe almost every season, either in Europa League or Champions League. And he has that experience. He also has that experience in the World Cup as well. He's kind of a streets won't forget player for Celtic because of how fantastic he was for them. It's sad to see him leave that team, but it's also really interesting to see him join a Premier League side.
It's actually surprising to see how many players they have signed.
Yeah.
They spent $28 million on Emerson from Toulouse in July, $4 million on what I can only assume would be a backup goalie because they bought another goalie for $10 million.
Mm-hmm.
I think they overspent on Fatawu. I think he could be a good player for them, but he's struggled even in the championship to be a big difference maker. So I think it could be an interesting move to see how he does. But players like Issa Diop, who he's had a lot of experience in the Premier League, multiple teams. He's been there for a long time. Daisen Maeda has played at Celtic for a while now. He's always banging goals in there, and I think he could be an interesting addition to this team, and somebody that it could be a steal for 11.7 million.
Well, he led his team in XG last season per 90 with a 0.49. But, you know, he led his team in a ton of different situations. Obviously, he was actually second in scoring and second in assists last season. And he had 14 goals and 6 assists last season. You know, he's always banging in goals, but what I really like about him, and I think he could be that Prem-ready player, is he's extremely intense and aggressive when he plays. Extremely intense and aggressive, but he has this pace, but he also has this, like, class. Like, honestly, I was watching his highlights, and it was a joy to watch because he's not the tallest player, but he's a player that plays with a lot of strength and a lot of pace. And also just his ability with the ball. He's really techie with it, and he's a really joy to watch. He had 4 goals in the Champions League in 2024-25, and he had 3 assists in last year's Europa League. So he has experience in top divisions and top leagues. So I think he could definitely be a steal. I just think that people potentially look at the places that he's been playing for a lot of seasons now, and they view it as kind of low, and you know, we got to be careful getting those players. But I think he's one player, I would say, that comes from that Scottish Premiership that can do very well in the Premier League this season.
I do also think that the signing of Sasa Lukic from Fulham, you know, he's been playing in the Premier League for multiple years now as well. Those are the kind of signings that I think are safer and are more likely to guarantee Premier League success. Is getting guys that have played in the division, getting guys that have played in the Champions League, in Europa League. Those are tough competitions, and I think bringing those kind of players into a newly promoted team is always going to be a good strategy.
You know, they're kind of trying to right the wrong of their mistake that they did when they got promoted last time, where they didn't really necessarily get that much talent. And, you know, this season, they're really trying to get their team to be that Prem ready. And I think that, in my opinion, they're the most Prem ready team right now based off of their transfers than the other two.
I can definitely see that. Yeah, I think they've bought well.
Yeah.
They've bought a lot of players, which could go both ways. But I do think bringing in more players will help them having better squad depth.
Yes.
You know, they've brought in some interesting players, some guys that I think, you know, maybe were a little bit unnecessary. Guys like Florentino from Burnley.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't really do much at Burnley last year. And I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see if he does any better this year at Ipswich. And Fatawo, I think, you know, he's had a couple rough years in a row now, getting multiple relegations with Leicester. It'll be interesting to see how those guys do, but I do think their other signings have been very good.
Now, what's your thoughts on Issa Diop, obviously being a West Ham player in the past? What's your thoughts on him being on Ipswich now?
Well, you know, when he came to West Ham, you know, he wasn't necessarily considered a great signing during the time he was at West Ham. He played a fair amount of games for sure. He just never really was what, you know, he was hyped up to be after coming from the French league and being so good there. You know, he's obviously played 200 or so Premier League games now. Yeah. He's a guy that's going to give them stability. He played very well at the World Cup, I must say.
Yeah, 5 out of 5 matches starting for Morocco, and he scored that key goal in the Netherlands game to force extra time.
And, you know, obviously, you know, he's been in the Prem for 8 years now. Mm-hmm. This will be his 9th season. I think he's going to be a player that that Ipswich can lean on this season to kind of be a difference maker, to play a lot of minutes, and I think he will probably be one of their better center backs this season.
Yeah. Now, do you have any predictions for this game?
I think it could be a draw.
I think it's 1-1.
I think a 1-1 draw makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, Sunderland obviously have good players. I think it could be kind of a 1-0 game. I don't think it's going to be too many goals scored in this game. I think they're not that far off in terms of quality in total on the team, and I think it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game. Now we have around 10 minutes until this episode is completed. And, of course, we have to talk about West Ham in the championship. I think definitely with West Ham in the championship, we'll probably make this into a segment for our next episodes, and we'll find a unique, fun name for it and stuff like that. But right now, West Ham obviously in the championship this season. What's your thoughts on West Ham's transfer window, just West Ham in general? Are they ready for this championship? And do you think they are vying for that promotion?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting transfer window in terms of player sales. We've made a lot of money in player sales, 175 million.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit more than that with Callum Marshall's sale to Luton Town. I don't know how much that one was. And, we've only signed 2 players so far, but if we're gonna Reece Nelson transfer is apparently 90% done. Whether that's a loan deal or a permanent deal, I think that's a good signing for us. A player who's going to give us squad depth on the left side. Manor Solomon, I think, for 5.9 million, it's a good deal for him despite, some other things I think about the player. But I think, he can be a good player for the championship. He's obviously had a little bit of a rough go since coming to Tottenham. I do think, he had a good spell with Leeds in the championship when they got promoted that year. I think he can be a big player for us this year, especially at the number we got him for. I think you can't really go too wrong with that transfer. And I think bringing in Joel Veltman on a free, he's played a ton of games in top divisions. And, he's never played in the championship before, but I think he can be a guy that's going to offer a lot of stability. He can play right back, he can play center back. And he gives us a little bit more flexibility on the defensive line in somebody that I think was needed, somebody that can be a little bit of a leader in the dressing room.
Now, you've kept a majority of your players. How is that going to impact your chances on staying or getting promotion, I should say?
Well, I think, obviously we have the best player in the championship, Jared Bowen.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to score a ton of goals. Valentin Castellanos, he's already scored twice this year.
I know some really good goals, too.
We have guys like Pablo who I think could potentially be of, greater value in the championship. He was around it a lot against Portsmouth. I think he will probably finally score his first goal this season, hopefully. But even if we don't have Pablo starting, I think, the links to Troy Parrott and how that's going, I do believe that, if we have a front four potentially of Jared Bowen, Valentin Castellanos, Troy Parrott, and Manor Solomon, I think we're going to score enough goals that where the defensive side doesn't matter quite as much. I think we need to bring in somebody in the midfield to be a little bit more creative, but I think getting Edson Alvarez back from loan and him staying with the team this year will be, a big thing for us. And seeing James Ward-Prowse be included again, I think will be helpful as well. Just getting players back from loan almost feels like getting new transfers in, especially going down to the championship where they can be a bit more effective. I do think we need to sign somebody in the midfield who's a little bit more creative, especially after selling Freddie Potts and Mateus Fernandez. I think we need to kind of bring in another attacking midfielder, somebody who can move the ball a little bit quicker and just is faster on their feet in general in the midfield. We have a pretty old midfield, but it was good to see George Earthy get a lot of play time in the other game. Defensively, I think we have a very strong pairing of Max Kilman and Mavropanos.
Mm-hmm.
I think those guys can both do very well in the championship. Max Kilman had a fantastic game against Portsmouth. He was very strong from the back. He was making lots of runs. And guys like Kyle Walker-Peters on the right back side, I think he had a fantastic game. And then left back wise, we have Ollie Scarles and Malik Diouf still. And those guys can both be very, very strong players on that side. And in goal, Mads Hermansen and Alphonse Ariel are still here. I think it gives us a very good chance to win the championship, win a lot more games than we're used to, and we still have players that are going to leave. Obviously, Aaron Wan-Bissaka is going to be going. Jean-Claire Todibo can be going. Fulkrug probably is going to leave as well. I think Maxwell Cornet could leave, and then that gives us a little bit more leeway to bring in a couple more guys on loans potentially from Premier League teams if they want to, and just kind of reshape the team a lot before going into the depth of the championship season and playing a lot more games.
Now, your team's been linked with like 2 Premier League streets we never forget players, and that is Dele Alli and Jamie Vardy. What's your thoughts on those 2 players?
Well,
On those 2 links, I should say.
Jamie Vardy is, I feel like that'd be a terrible signing.
Yeah.
He's like 40 years old now.
39.
I don't really think we need to be signing players that are far past their time. I think, he could go play in the MLS maybe. But, that's only if the Troy Parrott deal falls through, which I don't believe will. I think, we're very committed to getting that deal done. I think Dele Alli he's here for like a trial, and then if Nuno likes what he sees, he'll sign him. But I feel like
It's
even
interesting.
if he does get signed, he's probably not going to play that much considering he played with MK Dons in League 2 most recently, League 1, League 2 most recently, and did nothing there. I think if he can become a fraction of the player he was at Tottenham, I think then he can be of value. But I don't think that either of those will necessarily be done this season.
Yeah. I mean, Dele Alli would be just interesting to see. A lot of people, we always wanted Dele Alli to make it to that level because he was so good on Tottenham. And obviously it didn't go to plan, but it would be neat to see him back in a top flight, but just even back on a top team. West Ham is that team that a lot of people know, obviously. Back in the 1966 World Cup final, you had 2 fantastic players on that lineup, and you had another one as well. You had
West
3,
Ham
I
won
think.
that World Cup.
Yeah.
Jeff Hurst got a hat trick.
He did?
Another one of our players got the other goal, and then we had the captain of the team.
Yeah. So, I would love to see Dele Alli on that team. But yeah, I don't necessarily know. It seems like a career mode transfer where you just are like going off of vibes, being like, let's see if I can make Dele Alli that player that he once was. But, he is kind of a fraction of himself. And I think you said even if he can get a fraction of what he was, that's even really good, right? So I think it would be decent. Jamie Vardy, don't really know why you're even linked with him, to be honest. He's a decent footballer. We know how great he is, but, he was great in his prime 10 years ago, and now, he's not that level anymore, which is fine, right? We all age. I think, definitely going to a MLS side might be nice for his career, to end his career by still, banging in the goals and being that player that he is. And stuff. Now, what's your thoughts on the Freddie Potts situation? I know a lot of West Ham fans were like, he was supposed to be Mr. West Ham, and then obviously he got a transfer out of your team.
I do think, he would have been a good player to keep this year.
Yeah.
I just don't think, he's going to grow that much as a player from where he is now.
Yeah.
I think where he is now is pretty close to his peak. He obviously, his dad was a big-time West Ham player, and people kind of expected him to kind of be the next Mark Noble.
Yeah.
But I don't think he ever had that kind of potential to be that kind of player, in all honesty.
Yeah. Now, do you think it's a great move for him to leave West Ham and go to a different league?
I think he'll do a great job in the Belgian league. I think he can be a very strong player in that league and kind of be one of the better players on that Club Brugge team. He's played a decent amount at West Ham, but he never really showed that much, in my opinion. I think, going to a little bit lower quality of a league in Belgium, a league that I think he can compete a little bit more in. It will be good for him.
Now we've reached the end of this podcast episode. We had a great talk about the newly promoted teams and their first games in the Premier League. And we also talked about West Ham, which we'll definitely probably make into a segment to talk about West Ham. So we can feature your team, West Ham, Zach, in the next couple episodes with a new segment that we're going to have a very cool name for. Now, with that being said, Zach, can you do your sign off, please?
Bonjour, au revoir, and have a great rest of your week.
It's great to be back. Thanks, guys, for another great episode, and we'll see you next week.